Hello, BookTube. I would like to make another video just talking to you about books. I did that yesterday, and it not only distracted me, but it actually cheered me up, and seemed to go over well with you. So, and it is, my natural register to to talk to people about books. So I thought I'd do that again. And since we're at the midpoint of the month of July, that naturally starts to suggest looking forward to the month of August. So I thought for today I would do one of the different kinds of TBR videos, to be read videos, that I could make on this channel and will make on this channel. These break down into three different categories. There are the personal choices for rereading that I do in August. One is carved in stone. Every August I reread Homer's Odyssey. But there are lots of others hovering around the periphery that will certainly get done. A lot of that rereading will be fueled, I hope, by resumed trips to the Brattle Bookshop once it's not 100 degrees here. So that's one TBR that I could do, is all the stuff that I'm feeling like reading in August, because I'm a Kindle girly mood reader, so it's all about the feels. And then another kind of TBR would be BookTube fueled reading that I'll be doing in August. Summer of Sport is continuing for August. Book Trek is continuing for August. And of course, August is the time of one of the greatest BookTube events of them all, Garb August, Criminali's event celebrating the reading of trash. I am one of the co-hosts and have been dilatory in making an announcement video of any kind. But Garb August is sliming right along in August, and I plan on doing a huge amount of trash reading for the month. But for me, there is also a third kind of TBR, and that is my profession. That is new and forthcoming books in the American book market, the type of things that I will be getting from publishers, that I will be talking about with publicists, that I'll be reviewing in the various venues where I review things. And I thought I would go over that third TBR today, just a bit. We could do 10 of these for August. In the American book market alone, in August there'll be, 10,000 books released? If you cut that number in half, you could cut that number in half by eliminating Bibles, textbooks, language books, instruction books for how to drive or how to operate MS-DOS or whatever. You could, if we're generous and we cut that number by half, that still leaves 5,000 books. So I could do this more often than I will. But I thought I'd go over just a few of these and see what we make of them. I've read a couple, I think. The first one I have not read, but I read its prequel. I read the first book in the series and thought it was a hoot. This is by Reed Farrell Coleman, and this is Blind to Midnight. It's a Nick Ryan novel. If you have a long memory on this channel, you'll remember me talking about the first book in this series, about a super guy, about a Superman. Nick Ryan is basically the Executioner. He's basically Jack Reacher. He's a Superman. He's who you call. He's who cops call when they need help, as the tagline for the book goes. He's basically indestructible. He's basically all-knowing. Picture Denzel Washington's The Equalizer, someone who is aware of every situation on 50 different levels long before you even wake up in the morning, things like that. At first, with books like this, the Nick Ryan is by far from the only character like this in an ongoing series. And at first, when I started to be aware of these series as a phenomenon, I was irritated by boredom because there are no stakes. Okay, if 50 guys were to taser Nick Ryan at the same time, and in the minute that incapacitates him just a little so that he finally gets a little relief from talking about all our ladies' hearts he's broken, if in that minute where the 50 tasers simultaneously incapacitate him, you were to put a nuclear bomb under him and set it off immediately, maybe you might ruin his Monday. But otherwise, it's irritating how adolescently superior these heroes are. This kind of hero is. But then I think it was the first Nick Ryan novel that finally dropped the penny for me and made me realize that I can get a huge amount of enjoyment out of these things if I read them as comedy. I don't think this is written as comedy. I think this is written as serious as a heart attack. But if you read it as comedy, as a send-up of the tough guy hero, it really works. That's the secret that I'm using, whether or not it's intended by the author or not. So I'm actually looking forward to Blind to Midnight. The author has let's just diplomatically say, very little in the way of writing skill. Almost none in the way of writing skill. Uh, Never met a cliche that he didn't like. Poorly blocked out action sequences, which you'd think would be lethal to a He-Man action series, but it's not. It's not at all. Jonathan Mayberry is another guy. His Joe Ledger novels are the type of thing that I'm talking about. A hero who is all but bulletproof. And Joe Ledger is a fantastic writer of action, but he blocks out the sequence of his scenes very poorly. Those two things don't go together, and you just have to put up with it. If you're going to do it, you just have to put up with it. I will find a way to enjoy Blind to Midnight. I'm sure that I will. Then this next one is a novel that, well, its premise is a bit on the unlikely side. It's called The Editors. Heck of a cover. And it's basically about Wikipedia. It's a thriller in the world of Wikipedia. It's not called Wikipedia in the book, but it is Wikipedia. It's a gigantic, sprawling, collective endeavor of an online repository of double and triple fact-checked information. And that sounds fascinating on its own. It sounds like a little bit of The Geek Shall Inherit the Earth, to think that that could ever be the grist for a thriller. But apparently in this book, there's a convention of the editors of this site. Wikipedia has a cadre of editors who put in long, hard hours for not much money. And they have also a gigantic, sprawling Kuiper belt of volunteers who put in long, sprawling hours for no money at all. I firmly believe that one of the greatest things that the internet era has produced is Wikipedia. I think it's so much a part of the background of our lives, a lot of us, especially writers, that we don't even think about it. And shamefully, way too many writers and editors that I know never contribute money to Wikipedia. They never do it. And they should. Just set it up on a recurring thing. It doesn't have to be a large amount of money, but set it up on a recurring basis so that you don't have to think about it anymore, and you are doing your bit to keep Wikipedia running, instead of just taking everything that they offer and doing nothing in return. But anyway, there's a convention of these uber nerds, and they start to turn up dead, and clues, I gather, clues to the next victim and also to the identity of the killer start to be fraudulently embedded in various Wikipedia entries. It's not actually Wikipedia in the book, but you know what I mean. Because you can add something to a Wikipedia entry, and the editors, the watchdog teams, will scrub it if it's wrong. I don't see how that premise can work. These people are inherently uninteresting. If they were at all interesting, they wouldn't be online editors for a free online encyclopedia. They wouldn't be spouting lines of code and company conduct rules when they get together for their Cobb salad convention. But I don't know this author. I don't know this book at all, so it could be that this will surprise me. Certainly the premise is interesting enough. When we deal with premises here, the premise is going to be my problem with this next book. This is Jodi Picoult's new book. I'm not a super fan of Jodi Picoult. I know some of you really like her a lot more than I do. I don't think there's any pejorative intended there. I don't think I've ever read a Jodi Picoult novel that I didn't on some level like. I don't think any of them are very good, but none of them I don't think are any bad. And this is her new one, which is ambitious, I think, for her. I'm not sure that she's ever done anything like this. It's By Any Other Name, another lovely cover. And it's one of those split narrative novels, split time frames, where one time frame is taking place in the present day and one time frame is taking place in a historical setting. And yet the events are dovetailing, and it can be done clunkily or it can be done really well. I don't know what to expect from how Jodi Picoult will do it. It is such a common gimmick now, a narrative gimmick for novels, that the market is absolutely flooded with this kind of book where you need to know the date stamped at the top of each chapter in order to know which storyline you are continuing in the book. And there's so many of them that naturally, by Sturgeon's law, most of what I read like this is really bad. Just really poorly done. where not only is the historical setting poorly researched, but the modern setting doesn't feel any more believable either. And I'm worried about that with this book. This is about a playwright, a female playwright, who adopts, in the present day, who adopts a male pseudonym because she is facing a wall of misogynist discrimination about getting her work considered or produced or staged. And the parallel historical narrative is, I guess, a character who's going to end up being her ancestor, who is basically Shakespeare's sister from A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Basically, she's a brilliant artistic woman in Shakespeare's London who wants to write plays and faces a gigantic wall of misogynistic oppression in doing so, and has to adopt a pseudonym of some kind. So there'll be a parallel between those two stories, and usually in a book like this with the two parallel historical narrative lines, something that happens in the past will find a way through a MacGuffin to register in the present. And that is a perfectly good, perfectly solid premise, except for the problem that I have with the premise, as I mentioned, is that the first half, the present day half, is obvious science fiction. And I don't know if that means that we're going to have laser guns and hover cars. A narrative set in the present day in which a woman, because she's a woman, cannot get a play considered, published, produced, acted, is wildly, ravingly insane. That is wildly, ravingly insane. So the exact opposite of that has been true for years, and is still true. It is utterly ridiculous to set up a boot heel of the patriarchy narrative for the 21st century in any area of the creative arts. That is just lunacy. And I don't know, I've only going on the description here, so I might be missing the nuances of what Jodi Picoult is doing. For instance, maybe the contemporary periods of this book are set in the 1930s, when, for instance, on Broadway and off-Broadway, there were only 150 female playwrights earning a living instead of the 1,550 that are earning a living today. Still not a rosy ground for painting a convincing picture of the boot heel of the patriarchy. Maybe, but then again, if you go back too far, you've got two historical narratives instead of only one. Granted, in Judith Shakespeare's day, the boot heel of the patriarchy was there, and if you were a woman, as Virginia Woolf says, in A Room of One's Own, not only could you not write your own plays, but you'd be sneered at for even suggesting it. It wasn't even known whether you could walk the street. Could you go into a tavern and buy a meal? So you certainly couldn't live by your pen. Until Aphra Behn, you couldn't live by your pen. That situation isn't true anymore, and hasn't been true in a long time. In a long time. Edna Ferber could tell you horror stories about the patriarchy of her day, and was also a millionaire. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see what this is like. It may be that Jodi Picoult bites off more than she can chew from me. Some of you, it's like I say on this channel all the time, when authors, sometimes an author who has consistently pleased you will have credit in the bank of Steve. I always use that phrase, and I always mean to imply by it, I hope you get my implication anyway, that there are all kinds of banks. Every one of us has one, and they use all the kinds of different currency. Stephen King, David Foster Wallace, can have perfect credit in the bank of so-and-so, who's not me. They can't do business at my bank, but they might have excellent credit at your bank. They may never have displeased you. And I'm certain that out there are plenty of people for whom Jodi Picoult is that kind of writer. She can't do any wrong. I'm not one of them, so I don't know what to expect by any other name. But and this next one, I really don't know what to expect. The descriptions that I get of it make it sound pleasingly surreal, pleasingly inventive. It's by Gary Raymond, and it's called Abandon All Hope. It's a personal journey through Welsh literature, in which I gather the unnamed narrator. This is nonfiction, but I gather there's an unnamed narrator who has a Virgil-style guide in the form of a figure named Gary Raymond, taking the narrator and the reader through the history of Welsh literature. It's ups and downs, it's great writers and minor writers. I assume it's feuds. I don't know what to expect here. It'll be a lot of fun for me in one of the ways in which you might think it wouldn't be. because I don't know all that much about Welsh literature. So this is going to teach me a lot. I'm assuming it's going to teach me a lot. I don't know how reliable the narrator will be, but we'll see. Then this next one is by K.C. Wells, and it's contemporary romance. It's contemporary gay romance. You got to have something for the gays. And I've got my doubts. It's called Tailor Made for Me, and it's got one of those cartoon covers, and the cover also has a plot description on it. Cupid ran out of arrows, so he used a luggage cart. And this is about a smoldering super hottie who's as gay as morning in May, who yields to the entreaties of his best friend to pretend to be her boyfriend for an event, because she isn't seeing one at the moment and would be really, really embarrassed. And while they're at the event, a gorgeous guy runs into him with a luggage cart. And I'm sure that such things happen. I'm sure that they happen, but can we agree that this contemporary gimmick, this very template, a contemporary romance with a cartoon cover and the bisexual lighting in which the two characters collide with each other, can we agree that it's been done into the ground in the last 4 years and maybe should be retired? Since all of these people and everyone else, including your parents, met on Grindr, can we maybe just retire this gimmick? What I'm worried about, I don't know anything about K.C. Wells, don't think I've ever read this author, but what I'm worried about is that the entire essence of the book, everything, the different characters, their initial reactions, their long-term reactions, the developments of the plot, I'm worried that literally all of that is on this cover. And that all I need to do is look at this cover to know the book. Or, more importantly, no shade cast here. Like I said, I don't know K.C. Wells. But right now, without any future technological development, you could hand this cover, take a picture of this cover, the title, the description, and the picture, to a generative AI, and it would and tell it, produce a 200-page novel from this picture. And there are generative AIs out there that could do it. And it would be readable. And it would have characters. And it would have plot developments. And it would have, of course, the signature meet-cute moment. And my question with books like this is, you'll notice on this channel, I have not sounded the alarm about generative AI. There have been plenty of so-called think pieces and also refuse to think pieces in the New York Times and elsewhere about what this is going to do to the world of publishing, what's going to do to the world of writing. I haven't sounded the alarm because I haven't been alarmed. Not because there's a chance that an AI writing a book from just this picture would write a book that's indistinguishable from the book that K.C. Wells, the living, breathing human being, wrote, but because any book that can be duplicated indistinguishably by AI isn't worth reading. So what difference does it make to me whether it's written by K.C. Wells or a K.C. Wells bot? It doesn't make any difference to me, either way. So I will give this a try, and I will hope that I get more for my time than exactly this. I don't want the book to be exactly that. Then we have something from Osprey Books. Some of you book addicts, especially military history addicts here in the United States and in the UK, will know Osprey. They are very distinctive in a bookstore. They're thin, white-spined trade paperback productions of historical events and periods and battles and battle wear, battle armor, battle dress, battle equipment, siege equipment, weapons and whatnot, maps. An Osprey volume is a thing you can lose an hour in. They are really, really wonderful books. I used to know someone years ago who had an entire room of Osprey volumes and eagerly waited for every new one. And not just so that he could collect them, he pored over them before they went on his shelf in meticulous order. No idea what happened to that collection. He, of course, went to the great reenactment society in the sky. But I don't know what happened to that collection. Probably the relatives threw it in the junk. But Osprey books are great. If you're a history buff, they are great. And they have a new one coming out in August on the Battle of Gettysburg, the third day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, of course, this caught my eye because I have been ad hoc, not really planning on doing it, doing a huge amount of reading and rereading about the Battle of Gettysburg. A huge amount. Suddenly, just by propinquity at the Brattle bookshop, I have 6 books on Gettysburg, plus The Killer Angels by Michael Shara. So I've been sunk deep in I don't need much inducement. The Battle of Gettysburg, of course, is the signature battle of the American Civil War, and widely regarded as the turning point of the war. Now, Civil War aficionados would argue that. They would say the fall of Vicksburg is far more important. They would also, a lot of the ones that I've heard, give it to Fredericksburg. But I think the consensus is that it's Gettysburg, where Confederate General Robert Lee is invading the North, and comes to believe the battle is precipitated by accident, because Lee would ordinarily know the ground. He would ordinarily know the armies and the disposition all around him, but he doesn't have a cavalry. The cavalry would usually give him that information, but Jeb Stuart, his cavalry officer, has circumnavigated the Union army and captured a whole bunch of wagons, but has been incommunicado with his army. So Lee doesn't know what's in front of him, and as a result, the two armies, all of the South and General Meade's gigantic Northern army, meet at a town of Gettysburg without planning to do so, and a gigantic battle erupts that lasts for days. And the third day, the first day is a near-run thing. Lee makes some inexplicable tactical decisions that they're inexplicable to his fans. They underscore, in my mind, the fact that he was never all that great a general. And even so, things come very close, largely aided by illusion. The reason that the typical narrative in the South at this time was that things came really close is because the South didn't know what they were facing. They were facing unbeatable odds, on unbeatable terrain. They just didn't know that. Second day, they did know that, and there were still more really close encounters. And then you get to the third day, when all the pieces are in place, when everybody knows who's there, when generals and lots of men have died. And on the third day, you know what you're doing. You have a choice. If you're Robert E. Lee, you have a few choices. One, very famously, is that you can move to outflank your enemy, turn his army. He has a flank out in the air, because Meade wasn't a good general either. He has a flank out in the air. If you leave the front of him secretly, you could flank him and turn his army and maybe do a huge amount of damage. That's one alternative. Other alternative would be to withdraw. Send your men packing back in the reverse order of the way they came in, and live to fight another day. And then there's a third alternative, which is for you to march your men, the freshest men, in this case the men led by General Pickett, famously Pickett's Charge. I think it's even on the cover. No, it's not on the cover, but that's what you say. Gettysburg Day 3 to anybody who, unlike David Murphy, is a Civil War guy, they're immediately going to say Pickett's Charge. Bill Rutenberg you say Gettysburg Day 3, and he'll say, Pickett's Charge. And that is the third alternative, and the one that Robert E. Lee took, which is to take his freshest men, the ones who'd been in the back and who had just come forward, and march them straight at the center, uphill, of entrenched battlements of the Union Army, which had been massively reinforced, had tons and tons of reserve men, tons of bullets and equipment, maybe not all the way on the fringes, but the center was not going to yield, and just march them that way. Just I've been here for 2 days, I'm still here, they haven't beaten me, so what I'm going to do is just take them by main force, which is insane. And as much as I hate Robert E. Lee, he had never been quite that insane on the battlefield before, as to think that he could win an army against a gigantic, by this point he knew the size of the force he was facing, to think that he could win a gigantic battle against Union forces by a front-to-front battle is a mistake worthy of George Washington. It's the kind of mistake that George Washington's staff had to desperately stop him from making over and over again during the American Revolution. And yet that's what Lee does. Pickett's Charge does indeed happen. And as I've said many times before, if you go to the battlefield of Gettysburg, you will see what that actually entailed. It was not possible. It was not even remotely possible. It could not possibly work. It could not possibly work. And this book, these Osprey books, are fantastic for bringing it all to visual life. This will show you where it was from hour to hour, what their strength was, what their supply lines were like, where they were in relation to the major roads, where they were in relation to the actual town of Gettysburg. This will show you all of the equipment that was being used and photographs and illustrations of everything that's been pulled from the battlefield, photographs that were taken of the battlefield. Just, these are wonderful. I mean, you can read a big narrative history of the Battle of Gettysburg. There have been many. There have been two, at least, that I know of, that where they're multi-volume, one big volume for each day of the battle. But there are plenty of others. I have, like I mentioned, I have a whole shelf of them now. But boy, oh boy, will you get the gist of it if you just get these Osprey volumes. Get volume 3 and then volume 1 and volume 2. But you don't need, these aren't narratives. There's a lot of text in these books, but they're not narratives, so you don't need to get the first and second volume. But I wouldn't miss it. I try not to miss Osprey volumes if they come within my realm of interest, and a lot of them do. I try not to miss them anyway, whether it's the Wars of the Roses or the English depredations in Ireland over the centuries, or the American Civil War, or the American Revolutionary War. Then this next one is a big fat hardcover comic book omnibus. So I may not be getting it. I may try my best to get an electronic copy. Those big, heavy omnibus editions that Michael K. Vaughan loves so much are not very convenient for reading. They're too heavy to read, propped on your sternum when you're flat out in bed. They're too heavy to read on your lap in a chair, if you want to hear from your lap in the next day for the rest of the day. They're really just awkward. You can't travel with them. It's Frida, stop it. Hang on just a second. Stop it. She's not going to stop it. She's just staring at me. She's saying, "Who are you to tell me to stop it?" And she's right. It's 150 degrees here, so it's just, I don't want her chewing on something that's going to bother her. But anyway, let's just go back to the books. This is a big hardcover omnibus of Spider-Man. And it is by J. Michael Straczynski, who is the writer. And here he deals with a few artists. Mike Deodato doing some fantastic work here. The great Ron Garney is in this volume. This is, as far as I know, not titled. It's just the designation of what this book is that it will be J. Michael Straczynski being the writer. And this has lots and lots of storylines in it. It's a big fat thing, and some of those storylines are better than others. There's a storyline in here of a character called Morlun, for instance. I'm pretty sure, if I remember the number of the issues collected in here correctly, that will be in here. And yet, as you can see, it's J. Michael Straczynski, and then you've got Mike Deodato, Ron Garney, Joe Quesada, but no John Romita Jr., who did the artwork for the storyline that I'm thinking of. He's a big draw. He should be on the cover of this thing. But anyway, if I'm correct in the numbering, there's a storyline in here where Spider-Man faces off against a creature called Morlun, who can't fly, can't shoot energy beams, but is not beatable physically, and beats the stuffing out of Spider-Man. Chases him all up and down Manhattan. It's a classic bottle storyline. The Fantastic Four are not available. The Avengers are not available. No other heroes available. No one comes to Spider-Man's aid, except one other person, an older man named Ezekiel, who seems to have spider powers just the same as Peter Parker does. That storyline is terrific. It's rereadable, especially its ending, because the ending is that Peter Parker's saintly Aunt May discovers that he is Spider-Man. No tricks, no, oh, I said this, but I meant something else, no lookalikes, none of the stuff that Stan Lee used to pull, but literally knows that her nephew is Spider-Man, which changes the nature of the book, and in some very, very good ways. Some of the issues that are in here are ones that I have reread so many times as single-issue copies that they are falling apart, so I am tempted. But I am assuming that Marvel will make epic collections out of this stuff, or has already. And those are paperback. They're far easier to handle. They're far easier to access in every way. So I'd like to hope that this omnibus will not be my only alternative. And this omnibus also contains perhaps the most hated Spider-Man storyline of them all. One More Day. it's only unlike in Les Mis, where it's one day more and is the highlight of the show. One More Day is vilified by Spider-Man fans. Spider-Man, in order to save his Aunt May, literally makes a deal with the devil. And I read it and thought, what a bad idea. I read the issue and thought, what a bad idea. This also, I believe these issues intersect with the Marvel Civil War storyline, in which Tony Stark, Iron Man, decides that superheroes have to be employees of the state and hand over their papers and do what they're told. And famously, as Spider-Man is at this point has a bit of a hero worship of Iron Man going on, and famously at one point in the storyline, convinced by Tony Stark, Peter Parker decides to take his mask off on camera, since he's on board with Stark's idea about heroes being totally transparent. He takes his mask off on camera and tells the astonished press corps that he's been Spider-Man since he was a teenager. And the Ron Garney artwork is really good in a lot of these places. Of course, he's always good. That storyline is interesting on its own. Again, I just smirked when I read it, because as good as it is, it can't stay that way. Obviously, no matter how many times some writer, including maybe this one, comes on board Superman and says, hey, it would be a great idea if Superman revealed his identity to the world. No matter how many times you do that, you're going to have to put that toothpaste back in the tube. That's not going to be the way that it stays. Whatever, no matter how you do it, that's not going to be the way that it stays. But it was interesting. I especially like the little detail. I don't know who came up with it. It doesn't seem like a Straczynski thing. It seems like a Ron Garney thing. It seems like an artist thing. But there's a neat little gimmick. The Daily Bugle, of course, J. Jonah Jameson, the Daily Bugle, the Peter Parker's employer all those years from when he was 15 years old. Peter Parker selling pictures of Spider-Man to the Daily Bugle while J. Jonah Jameson is fulminating against the webbed menace on the editorial page, week after week after week. And when Peter Parker takes his mask off and reveals that he is Spider-Man, we get a great little detail where the next day's issue of the Bugle, the banner headline is, "Bugle to Parker, you're fired." So there's a lot in here. There's a lot in this that I would enjoy reading. It's just the format. That's all. It's just a format that I don't think I'm going to want. And then this next one, also hampered by format. This is, I believe, the companion to an art exhibit. It's the Royals, Tutors to Windsor. And it's got potted descriptions and lots of visuals of the various ruling houses for 500 years. But it's 150 pages long. So it literally cannot do them justice, any kind of justice, except maybe visual justice. I don't know how many visuals you can pack in to that kind of page count. We will see. I don't know. A lot of times books like this are not especially reviewable. A lot of times it feels wrong to review the book if you haven't seen the exhibit, and I'm not going to see the exhibit unless it's shown right here on the fainting couch. So we'll see. If this book were 1,000 pages long, if it were 1,500 pages long instead of 150 pages long, it still wouldn't tell me anything that I don't know about the Tudors or the Stuarts or the Windsors. But it might be really, really interesting. I would read that 1,500-page book, whereas this might be more for the casual reader who isn't steeped in the subject. We will see. I don't know. Then this next one is one that I have read, and I will give it another try. I will read it again when I get the finished copy. This is Catherine Bucknell's biography of Christopher Isherwood, Inside Out. It's big, it's dutiful, it's long. I enjoyed it. It reminded me a lot of the new biography of the poet Tom Gunn. Not just because the two subjects are gay men, but also in the execution. The Tom Gunn biography was very good and completely artless. It was completely thorough, completely comprehensive, and completely artless. I was interested in the subject matter, or I would not have kept reading. And keep in mind, you might say, well, isn't that what you say about any book? No, I was interested in the subject matter before I got to the book, or I wouldn't have kept reading. And that is not something that you do with every book. That is, in fact, an author abrogating responsibility. A small part of the responsibility. And a biographer has a lot of responsibilities. They have to have good information. They have to do their best to have all the information. They have to dot the I's and cross the T's in all sorts of documentary ways. But they also have to tell a story. And that Tom Gunn book, good Lord, I mean, you didn't have to go far to meet me on that book. I am, to put it mildly, interested in that subject. And I wouldn't have kept reading if I hadn't been. Well, I'm less interested in Christopher Isherwood. And also, unlike with Tom Gunn, who I guess you could make an argument wrote the best possible autobiography or biography of him in his own poetry, but only abstrusely, prism reflected like poetry does. But Christopher Isherwood wrote a book called Christopher and His Kind that is beautiful and deeply engaging. And I don't know. I'm going to give this another try. I'm going to read the finished copy with a pencil in hand. I will bear down on it. It's entirely possible that I missed the kind of narrative fire that I was looking for. And the kind of narrative fire that is necessary in a great biography. I worry sometimes, one of the misconceptions that nonfiction has, especially history and biography, one of the misconceptions that it has among people who don't read it, among people who are warned off it by school assignments, is that it isn't an active element of the book, that you don't need any artistry, you just need to present all the facts. That's not true. That's not true. A boring book is a bad book. So no matter what you're writing, a boring book is a bad book. You as an author, no matter what kind of author you are, except maybe for the aforementioned language books and MS-DOS manuals and whatnot, but for anything with the slightest bit general interest, no matter what kind of a writer you are, you do not get to just show up. That is not enough. And that's the feeling that I got with this book. But I read it the first time for impressions. I got that impression. But the next time, the next reading is the real one. Then this next one is by Melissa Fitzgerald and Mary McCormick, and it's a political book, an American political book, that will have no dissenting points. It will have no disagreements at all. It's What's Next? A backstage guide to the West Wing and the administration, the two-term administration of Jed Bartlett, the only president we all love. And this is by a couple of cast members, and I'm sure it will be loaded with pictures. And I don't know how much value there will be. The West Wing has produced a river of verbiage over the years, especially since it went off the air. Guidebooks, episode-by-episode breakdowns, thematic studies. Also, it's had political and social effects of absolutely seismic proportions that do not get reported on. They are not known unless you know what to listen for when you listen to some lying, bloviating politician. This show is absolutely memorized down to the last detail of dialogue by everyone who works in Washington. And they won't say it. They won't admit it. They'll say, I think I've heard of it. But no. No. This is... There's a movie called Boiler Room. And in that movie, the young ingenue has just joined this pump and dump junk bond trading house. And he's getting to know the wolfish guys that are bilking their customers. And at one point, he goes to the gigantic houses that they can afford. He goes to visit them, one of them in the gigantic house that his huge benefits and salary can afford. And it's empty. He hasn't bothered to unpack his furniture or his belongings because he's at work all day long, all night long. And when this ingenue gets to the house, all of these wolfish brokers, they've set up one thing. They've set up a TV. And they are watching Wall Street with Michael Douglas. And they're quoting the dialogue ahead of time. They're quoting the dialogue a beat ahead of time. They know every word of it. They know it intimately well. Same thing with this. No matter what. Republican or Democrat, no matter what, no matter who, they have memorized this show. But that's interesting. What I saw, a comment that so-and-so made to me at the craft service table, I don't know that this will be as interesting as that. I don't know how detailed it will be. I will mainly use it as a spur to remember the show, which of course I, like everyone else, loved. So I'll use it to remember the show, and we'll see. Maybe it'll be a really good West Wing book. Then we have a book by Barbara Emerson. This is history. This is the first Cold War. And this is the tense, growing, increasingly aggressive stance between Great Britain and Russia in the wake of the First World War, in the wake of, not in the wake of the First World War, in the wake of the Bismarck Wars, in the wake of German aggression that needed to be put down on the continent. It's a much studied time period. I don't know that I've ever read Barbara Emerson, but the success of this book, I would think, will hinge completely on her ability to convey the characters involved, not just the big names, but the diplomats and the emissaries who were so important in informing what was later known as the Great Game, informing what was known as these tensions that eventually did boil over in the next century. I haven't read a book on this subject since middle of last year, so I'm looking forward to this, and we'll just see what kind of narrative zest it has. And then the last one that we'll do are Sorry to Go Long. I'm talking about books. Sorry to go long. It is cheering me up, though. This is by Gregory Burns, who I think is a neuroscientist or a neurologist. And he writes a book coming out in August called Cow Puppy, about the cows that he takes on. He and his wife do the whole insufferable urban farmer type thing. I hate these people, of course. I hate these people. I live for the reports that they were doing a glowingly self-loving vlogging stint with their camera, didn't watch where they were going, and accidentally tripped into the wood chipper. I live for accounts like that because I can't stand the insufferable people who do this. But the outline of this book, the story, the description of it, is that this guy gets a small group of cows for his urban farmer adventure, and then starts to get to know them. He starts to realize that they're people, which of course they are. If you spend time with cows, you realize they're people, and they're rather endearingly goofy people. They're rather wonderful. They're not anywhere near. I don't mean to offend any farm folk here. They're not anywhere near as intelligent as pigs, but they're also not as opinionated as pigs either. And let's not even talk about horses. They're goofy and very friendly. They're delightful to get to know. If this book conveys the author realizing even a small part of that, then it might be delightful. It might be really delightful. So. Again, I'm looking forward to it. Most of the books on this list I'm looking forward to. Most of the books on this I have not read. But anyway, that is an August TBR. One of many August TBRs that we could do. I could do 2 or 3 more of these, of just upcoming new releases for the month. And I could also do the personal stuff, the stuff that I'm going to read. Of course, a lot of that I don't know. A lot of that will depend on what I find at the Brattle Bookshop. And then BookTube made me do it. And then the other August TBR, the one that a lot of you are grappling with, is BookTube events, including Garb August. So lots and lots of TBRs like that to deal with. We'll cover them all in due time if you don't mind. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.